BBC Sounds. Music, radio, podcasts.
Hello, I'm Carolyn Quinn. Thanks for choosing this edition of the Westminster Hour for Sunday, June the 14th. We're talking shops, schools, statues and Brexit as another stage in lockdown easing in England gets underway. Boris Johnson declares it deplorable that the statue of Winston Churchill should have had to be entombed in a protective shield, and he calls for a cross-governmental commission to look at all aspects of inequality. We discuss that and the task ahead for the government as it tries to shift focus from the public health crisis caused by coronavirus to the economic crisis that's looming as the country emerges from lockdown. My panel are Education Minister Gillian Keegan, Labour's Darren Jones, who chairs the Commons Business and Energy Committee, and Miatta Fahnbulleh from the New Economics Foundation think tank. We'll be looking into the impact of the coronavirus pandemic on young people and be joined as well by Caroline Wheeler, Deputy Political Editor of the Sunday Times, who'll guide us through the political week ahead. And let's start, shall we, with those protests this week, which have taken a very different turn this weekend from last, when the marches and protests started out in solidarity with George Floyd. The Prime Minister, as we heard, has been making it clear where he stands. He's written a piece for The Telegraph calling for a cross-government commission to look at inequality, but also referring to that statue of Churchill. He says he expects he's not alone in saying, "I will resist with every breath in my body any attempt to remove that statue from Parliament Square." And he's saying in this piece, Darren, we need to tackle the substance of the problem, not the symbols. We need to address the present, not attempt to rewrite the past. And that means we can't and must not get sucked into never-ending debate about which well-known historical figure is sufficiently pure or politically correct to remain in public view. I mean, I turn to you first because the debate about statues was ignited by events in your home city, Bristol, wasn't it? And the removal of Edward Colston as a landmark. Do you think it is time to draw the line now on that kind of action?
Well, what I think, Caroline, is that local citizens, local people should decide which statues are prominently in which locations in their city, and that should be part of our democratic debates where we live right across the country. And the Colston statue in Bristol, there'd been a long-running debate over many years about this. And now I think it's going to be ending up in the local museum as part of the slavery exhibition. And I can't deny the fact that whilst clearly I don't condone criminal damage, I welcome to see it moved from the city centre into the museum.
And the idea of tackling the substance, not the symbols, with this cross-government commission, how do you respond to that?
Well, commissions and reviews are, of course, welcome, but they have to result in actions. And we've had many commissions and reviews by this government, and I don't think we've had enough action. And we need to see that because, you know, when we looked at the protests that have happened this weekend with people with, you know, union flags claiming to be patriots, evidently that wasn't a real protest about the real actions to tackle inequality and discrimination in our country. And it's made me think, you know, what actually is a modern patriot? The patriots are the frontline staff that are keeping us healthy and fed during this pandemic. They're the workers who are going to roll up their sleeves and get the economy back on its feet. It's the business owners that are going to take the risks and invest to grow our economy off the back of this so that Britain can prosper and be successful. And that success and that future economy has to be one based on inclusion, when discrimination is something that is about history and not about the time that we're in today.
Gillian Keegan, you're probably hearing about this commission at the same time as we are, but I wonder what your first reaction is to it, and already concerns being expressed that it'll be a bit of a delaying tactic because there has already been a government racial disparity audit. It was carried out under Theresa May. Aren't the facts out there already?
Well, I think it intends to build on the work of the racial disparity audit. You're right. I mean, I'm just hearing about it as well. But I think the intention would be, I mean, I completely agree that we need to focus on substance, not symbols. And also with what Darren said, you know, in terms of inequalities, there are inequalities. We do need to tackle them. We do need to make more progress, and we need to do that more quickly for sure. So I think the intention now is to have a deeper analysis of the review and what the review said, and establish work to address each of those. And you know, we need to come together to tackle this issue. Nobody is saying that you know, we have to recognise that you know, there is inequality and we have to do something about it. We recognise the strength of feeling. It's been brought into sharp focus. and we need to act. And
Well,
this is the start of that action.
and
We need to do more, and the Commission will help that.
it has been brought into stark focus. And I mean, I know you're proud of your Liverpool roots, another port city, of course, like Bristol, that grew up largely on wealth from the slave trade. So I wonder what you make of the activity there. You know, some road signs on Penny Lane in Liverpool being defaced over claims that they're linked to the slave merchant James Penny. I mean, do you think they should be removed? Do you think that there should be more statues from the past removed, or should they be amended and plaques added to them, as some people are suggesting?
Well, no, I definitely don't think they should be removed. I mean, you could ask almost anybody across the whole world, and they would associate Penny Lane. It's memorialised in a Beatles song, and then there's all these other sort of people who have different potential views, but actually nobody really knows if any of the others are true or not. And they deface this sign, which is it's part of Liverpool's musical culture and heritage. So absolutely not. And it's right. If you go looking for it, if you go back far enough, you could find a debate about everything. We could debate many things, but I believe it's not going to help anybody. Black Lives Matter has a serious point about inequality, and I think we have democratic processes to discuss what art we have and what we have, statues, etc. In fact, I think Bristol Council were sort of debating that statue in Bristol. But just taking it down and actually erasing our history is the wrong thing to do. English Heritage, I think, have the right idea as well, which is, if we decide that there is greater context that needs to be put on to update, the history. We ought to do that, and that can be done as well. Now, I am in favour of that. I think that would provide the right balance, because the history is probably, let's just say, out of date and not balanced in some cases.
Well, Miata, you were born in Liberia. Your family fled here in the 80s at the onset of the first Liberian Civil War. I wonder how you view this moment, how pivotal you think this moment might be in influencing our attitudes towards racism. Will it change opinions, the call now for a cross-government review, or will it just be a bit of a flash in the pan moment?
I mean, look, we've had these moments where there are instances of racial injustice, police brutality that then sort of respond in a big backlash and protest. We've had these moments before. I think what feels different is, if you like, the scale of it. The fact that it is spanning across countries, and the sort of solidarity that has come alongside it. And for me, there is something really powerful of Black people and white people standing together, recognizing that there is racial injustice, there is systemic racism, there is deep-seated inequality that must be addressed. And I think that is heartening, and I think that is encouraging. But we need action. And, I think the Prime Minister is absolutely right in saying that we've got to get to the substance. We have to get to the substance. And for me, the debate about statues has been pretty frustrating, because it has distracted us from the issues. It's distracted us from the fundamental concerns that Black Lives Matter have been trying to raise around systemic racism. And we need to get back to that. I think a review is all well and good if it leads to action. And what worries me is that we've had, many a review, back from the McPherson report, the Lammy review under this government, the racial disparity audit, the Windrush review, and they don't seem to be resulting in the action that is required. So if the government wants to set up a commission, that's fine. It needs to be pretty quick and sharp, and it needs to get to tangible recommendations that actually deliver change, rather than warm words that kick it into the long grass.
A quick response from you, Gillian. Warm words?
No, and actually, obviously we commissioned the report by David Lammy, and we are working through those actions. The Windrush, the lessons learned came. The report was published in March, and the response is due. The government are working on that now. It's due in the next 6 months. There's been a huge focus on this. I agree. I mean, everybody wants to see action, but these are actually also rather big issues as well, in terms of how deep seated they are over time. There's been a number of targets to improve things, but we obviously need to do more, and that's what this commission is about, but it doesn't mean to say that the work that's been done before is not being followed up. It is, very much so.
All right. Caroline Wheeler, a cross-government commission looking at all aspects of inequality, employment, health outcomes, academic, other walks of life. We need to tackle the substance of the problem, not the symbols. I mean, has this review been discussed as far as you know before, or is it something that's just emerged this weekend?
It's certainly something that we were not aware of before the op-ed, which has been written for the Daily Telegraph tomorrow. It's interesting because I think, what we have seen is the racial disparity audit that was done under Theresa May does sound quite similar in terms of its scope. It looked at, for example, universities' access to university education, the criminal justice system, and made a series of recommendations. It's heartening to hear from Gillian that those are still being acted upon. But, one does wonder, whether the government sort of needed to get a grip quite quickly of this particular issue, given that there had been quite a lot of criticism sort of bubbling up, which was that actually the focus of the government had really been on cracking down on that very small minority of lawless protesters during the protests both last weekend and this weekend, rather than on the largely peaceful demands of those that gathered. I know the one in Hyde Park got cancelled, but those that gathered on Friday. So there was a sort of need to actually say, well, hang on, we are listening. And of course, that debate started with some quite feisty exchanges in the House of Commons from one particular Labour MP, Florence Eshalomi, who was basically trying to say to Priti Patel, the Home Secretary, I hear what you're saying about needing to crack down in terms of those protesters that are defacing statues and are breaking the law. But what are we doing for those protesters who are on the streets, who are making a really peaceful case on this? So I think it was high time that the government responded in some positive way to make it clear that they are listening.
All right, let me ask your view then on calls for a response on another issue. As we move to a situation with non-essential shops in England opening up tomorrow, the debate has moved quite sharply onto this idea of reducing the 2 metre social distance rule down to 1 metre. Now, how serious is the review that the government's making into that? They say that there'll be a response by July. Is it going to move to 1 metre? Is that inevitable?
I think it probably is inevitable. The noises coming out of Cabinet, the noises particularly coming out of the Treasury, those really ominous warnings about what could happen to the hospitality sector with potentially 3 million jobs lost sort of at the roll of a dice. So I think there are really serious moves now to do that. The difficulty the government have got is that the scientists are not on board. I was speaking to a member of the SAGE committee on Friday who was making really ominous warnings about it, saying, it's one thing to have 1 metre distance if you're side by side, but if you're face on, it's very dangerous. Equally, they're concerned that if you change the messaging at this point from 2 metres to 1 metre, people are probably only observing 1.5 metres already, that effectively it will eviscerate any kind of social distancing. And there have been some sort of dark mutterings from within the scientific community, from both Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallant's suggestions from their allies that they're even potentially prepared to resign over the issue. So there is going to be a big debate on this. But one of the messages that I think Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, was very clear on today is it is going to be a decision which is made by politicians. And I think that reflects the divide that there now currently is between the scientists and the economists, and particularly those in government who are really, really worried about the impact the continued lockdown is going to have on our economy if we're not able to open up the hospitality sector.
Well, Darren, as chairman of the business committee, you know those arguments are going on. You know about the call to reduce to 1 metre, to just get more people in and get business going, particularly in the hospitality sector, and try to avoid some of the job losses that are being predicted. Would Labour support that reduction to 1 metre, even if the scientists aren't fully on board?
Well, David Lammy said this morning on the Andrew Marr show that, of course, you've got to be led by the science, have an honest conversation with the public about the trade-off that you're going to make as a political decision maker between public health risk and economic risk. And, as chair of the business committee, Caroline, the thing that I'm most frustrated about is this is just yet another example of kind of incoherence out of government, lack of clear messaging. There are small businesses up and down the country who have been sticking down the tape, putting in the plastic dividers, rearranging the tables, trying to think about how they can work at a 2 metre distance. And now if they're told that they've got to go to a 1 metre distance, they're going to have to think about how they pay for that extra kit again, completely change their work unit and buy the kits to be able to get it back in. That decision should have been had in a very clear and open and honest way with the public, with businesses and with all of us as citizens, and done in a coherent and logical fashion.
So, Gillian, reducing the social distancing from 2 metres to 1 metre, it is crucial according to a lot of businesses. Do you really need a review to tell you to reduce it? I mean, your colleague Ian Duncan Smith, for instance, says the government's got all the information it needs already to just go ahead and make that reduction in time for hospitality reopening in July.
Well, actually, I think it's slightly missing the point, this conversation. Consumer confidence is what's absolutely key to consumer spend. So why are we starting in a cautious way? Because first of all, because we know the numbers have come down. We've just been hearing about the numbers now, which are incredibly hopeful in terms of the level. We know the numbers have come down, but we're starting slowly. We've put the 2 metres in place. It is a cautious approach, and of course it's inevitable that it won't stay there forever. We're not going to all spend 2 metres apart for the rest of our lives. It is going to change, and it is going to change in one direction. But the most important thing to do is that people feel safe. They'll get used to it. We'll get over the first hurdle. Confidence will grow. If the numbers stay, or continue to reduce, the 5 tests are still met, we'll all gain a bit more confidence, and it can be taken in those light. That is actually what we're doing. We're having all this conversation before we even put our toes into a shop. We need to get into the shop. We need to support the enormous effort that shop managers have been making all over the country. As I think we heard in your news, they're waiting for us to come back. They're very excited. We now need to repay their efforts by, supporting them if we want our high streets to still be there in 6 months.
And there
but
certainly
we need
are.
to build confidence.
There are concerns. I mean, some people are saying that they're really worried about returning to the shops, that they're worried about leaving their homes. Nevertheless, just respond, if you could, to Darren's point about, business who's putting down tape and setting up visors at 2 metres, and then in a few weeks' time they might be told to strip it all out and change to 1 metre. I mean, it's a lot to ask business to get on board with, isn't it?
Actually, I don't think so. I mean, certainly the visors and the screens will still be required. For them, once we all feel confident enough and supported by the science as well, we feel confident enough to move to 1 metres. That means they can double the amount of people in their shop. So I would imagine they'll welcome that. But I think everybody understands that this is an extraordinary, unprecedented times. There are no rule books, there are no guidebooks. We are acting as best we can on the information we have, which of course is imperfect information and it's lagging information. So we need to build that confidence. The best way to build the confidence is to start, and then by starting it, we'll all overcome the hurdles that we need. People have different appetites for risk, but we need to restart our economy. Tomorrow's that day, and I do hope we all go out and shop.
Darren.
Well, I've been speaking to many SMEs in the last week alone, and these aren't just about simple shops where you can organise queues. I've been speaking to driving instructors, people that make hats for weddings, kind of hairdressers and beauty therapists who prepare for weddings, and they have no idea about how the guidelines work in their circumstances, and they're concerned about that. And consumer confidence comes because consumers have confidence in what's happening. And if the government continues to say one thing and then U-turn and say another thing and then backtrack and not have clear guidelines that people can understand and implement, they're not going to have the confidence that we need to give them. If we had more logical output from government, I think we'd have stronger consumer confidence.
Miata, can I bring you in on this? Because, we are talking about this because of the warnings about job losses in the hospitality industry in particular. particular if they can't get enough people into their properties and their businesses. We had dire economic news this week, didn't we? A record-breaking, 20% drop in economic output in April alone. And the Chancellor's warned as many as 3.5 million jobs could be lost in a recession. What do you make, first of all, about things like the 1 metre, 2 metre rule? And how do you think the economy can be kick-started at this crucial time?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, so I don't think we can underestimate the economic context and how deep the recession that we have entered is and how painful it's going to be. And, you know, the government is right to be thinking about every way in which it can help sectors basically start operating again, which is where you enter the debate about 2 meters or 1 meter. And it's absolutely clear that for hospitality, for some retail sectors to operate, you need to move to 1 meter. I think the big question is, we know that the further away you are, the more you minimize the risk of catching this virus. And so if the government does move to 1 meter, it is going to have to mitigate with some other measures. And that's where it needs to be thinking about. And I think that the thing that is worrying, so in the end, our ability to kickstart particular sectors will depend on consumers. It will depend on when people feel confident enough to go and spend. And that's going to be driven by two things. It's going to be driven by worry about public health. And there the government needs to show that things like the test, track and trace system is working in the way that it needs to. So people are confident that we are managing this virus for the long term. But it's also a question of consumer confidence and whether people are confident to spend when they know that we are in a deep, deep recession. And, you know, I think most people are going to be cautious because they hear the message that this is unprecedented. Most people are going to be cautious because in the end, we know there will be job losses, even if we kickstart the economy. So I think there's a huge job for government in terms of trying to help us weather this. And that's in part some of the protections it provides for people. So it's done so through the furloughing scheme. What it does after that, I think, is a big, big question. But also, the government is going to have to spend. We are going to need big fiscal stimulus in order to pump prime parts of the economy, and in order to create jobs in things like housing, to build housing, energy efficiency, transition to green industries, all those things. The government is going to have to act in an unprecedented way because we are facing a crisis of the sorts we have not seen before.
And Gillian, this crisis, they are testing times for Boris Johnson and for the government. And the Chancellor's warning, as many as 3.5 million jobs could be lost in a recession. I mean, these are immensely worrying times, and people just want to feel that they've got a guiding hand through this, don't they?
Well, of course they do. And that's why, the government took, immediate action and unbelievably supportive action in terms of, the furlough scheme, in terms of grants, in terms of loans, in terms of business rates being cancelled across the year. It's one of the most generous packages in the world, and it certainly has, been instrumental in putting us in a better position. But until we start the economy, we won't know where we're going to end up.
I wonder, companies are going to start sharing the costs of those furloughed workers, aren't they, in August? I wonder if there's an argument for helping different sectors in different ways. Maybe not asking certain sectors which are particularly badly hit to have to make a contribution starting in August. Is there any thinking along those lines?
Well, I mean, I haven't seen that, but I wouldn't see that. But, there's a lot of ideas that are being looked at around the sort of the recovery plan and the economy. And I'm sure that all of these things are under consideration. But, the most important thing is you can't keep your economy, being furloughed for a long time. It will be 8 months by the time it finishes. So we do have to kickstart our economy again. And you have to remember something, which is before we went into this sort of coronavirus sort of recession that we kind of started ourselves, to protect public health. Before that, we had almost full employment in this country, and actually we had skills gaps in many, many areas, in health, in digital, in nursing, in building, in teaching. I mean, everywhere we look, social care, we had massive skills gaps. So, it is unclear what the shape of the recovery will be. Obviously, we want it to be as positive as possible.
All right.
But until we get there, we won't know. And we will have to take, the right steps. In terms of public spend, we had a very ambitious spending plan anyway, which we're looking, where we can bring that forward, etc., to stimulate the economy. I'm sure all of that is part of the recovery plan, which will be, being laid out in the next few weeks.
Exactly. In future weeks, we will be discussing where the money comes from, the tax, the borrowing, wherever it's going to come from. We know that we're going to get some sort of economic statement in the next few weeks. Just a quick word from you, Darren, in response to that.
Well, look, my committee's taking evidence on this sectoral approach and the different hits for different sectors. And my personal view is that we absolutely need to take a sectoral approach with different sectors supported in different ways. But the bottom line is we need to hear from government as soon as possible, because we are falling behind other countries like France, Germany and the United States, who've already set out how they're going to support different parts of the economy over the medium to long term. And we are falling behind. And, I'm urging the Prime Minister and the Chancellor and Business Secretary to bring forward their proposals as soon as possible. And I look forward to seeing them when they do.
Caroline Wheeler, we're saying these are testing times for Boris Johnson, for any Prime Minister, of course. But he in particular has come in for some criticism this week, hasn't he, for the way announcements have been made. There are lots of reports that there have been complaints about a lack of grip, that ministers and backbenchers are being left out of decisions, announcements coming out of the blue, confusing messages. What are you hearing?
Exactly that, to be honest, Carolyn. I've spoken to lots of backbenchers over the course of the past 2 weeks, and pretty much nobody seems to be happy. They've all got different gripes of one nature or another, whether it's the response to lockdown, whether it's that they're not taking action fast enough in terms of reopening the economy, whether it's the response to the Black Lives Matters protests, and whether or not, look, they were being tough enough on law and order. There is a lot of sort of disgruntled backbenchers. I mean, what's interesting really is they don't really know what to do with that sort of feeling of unease. Lots of questions asked about, well, what are you going to do about it? I mean, we're certainly not at the point where people are, muttering about putting in letters to the 1922 committee, as happened to Theresa May. But there is a lot of discontentment, a feeling that Boris has lost his mojo, was particularly something that was said to me by one backbencher, and that he's not across his brief and perhaps, struggling still with some of those symptoms of coronavirus, which obviously he had a, very bad bout of that disease, spending several nights in intensive care.
Well, Caroline,
and there are concerns that that's impacted his ability to govern.
Well, there seems to have been some briefing as well against Gavin Williamson, the Education Secretary, this weekend. He had to make a U-turn last week, didn't he, after the announcement that all primary school children would return to the classroom before the summer, and now that's not happening.
Yes, that's right. There was an announcement, as we know, at the beginning when lockdown started to be eased, that you were going to get the children in reception year 1, year 6 and years 10 and 12 who will go back tomorrow in secondary schools. Then there was a subsequent announcement suggesting that actually the government was going to try and get all primary school children back into school before the end of term for a month. Then Gavin Williamson had to come out and say that wasn't going to be the case. And that has caused some issues because, of course, you cannot reopen the economy if you have young children still at home. I should know, as a mother of 3, it's extremely difficult to work when you're homeschooling 3 primary school age children. And so that has caused some, great agony for parents, but also embarrassment within government about why there was such a dramatic U-turn
Gillian,
in such a short space of time.
You embarrassed? Is your boss safe?
Well, I think what this is all clear is it's much easier to lock down than it is to reopen. The fear and the uncertainty is what's leading to all of this sort of, discussion in the background. It's clear.
What
that
about the
Prime
specific
Minister...
questions about the Education Secretary, Gavin Williamson, then?
Well, clearly the Prime Minister and the Education Secretary set out, let's say, a more ambitious goal to get children back, to hopefully get all primary school children back, at least for a little bit of time before the summer. But, it's clear that they have had to, well, there's been some headwinds, right? There's been some headwinds with the unions. Again, it's about building confidence. It's about, I think the children are looking forward to it, but it's about building confidence with parents and teachers. You have to start these things and then you have to build on them. Clearly that's something else that'll be impacted by social distancing, and as we get more data and as we get more confident, and if the numbers still continuing to fall, then the risks are very much different as well. I think this is probably the scariest moment for everybody, and that's what you're hearing. There's a global pandemic, economic uncertainty. The first figures have just come out. We've got protests on the streets, and we've got the unions, not supporting fully the support. Children need to get back to school. That's what we're saying. They need to get back to school. We need to work with the schools to make that happen as quickly as possible.
And what can you tell us?
These things were at the Sorry,
because we can't see each other and we're doing this down the line. I have to talk over it. I'm so sorry. But I wonder what you can tell us about the big summer of catch-up for pupils that the Prime Minister's announced. The summer is the time when disadvantaged youngsters could be left falling even further behind. They've missed out on a lot of classes, haven't they now? They haven't got the computers to work online. I mean, is this going to be something that all pupils can benefit from? And what is it?
Well, what we've done so far is obviously moved as much online as possible. And I actually think the education system's done a remarkable job. They've set up a whole new system. They've got an Oak Academy with 10 million lessons. They've got BBC Bite Size, got most kids going online, a lot of people accessing learning. There's 100,000 PCs and internet routers gone out to those most disadvantaged. This has all happened in 3 months.
What's the summer of catch-up?
Of course, is something that the Education Secretary and the Prime Minister are working on. He's going to set out the plans, I believe, in the week next week. And, it's clearly looking at, what we can do to help children catch up. They have missed some lessons. They have missed vital lessons. And so there'll be a focus on what's the best way to help. There's a number of things I guess that'll be face-to-face and also sort of tutoring, etc., that they'll be looking at. But those plans they'll be setting out in the week. But there's clearly a need to catch up over the summer, and also as we go back in September, that catch up will continue to be necessary. Because it will take a bit longer to recover that time.
Well, let me ask Darry then. What would you expect from a big summer of catch up for pupils?
Well, look, this is just all too late. The tragedy is that for every day a child misses in school, they are falling behind in their curriculum and their learning, especially for children like I was from poorer backgrounds that benefit enormously from that face-to-face tuition in the classroom. And quite frankly, the government has not prioritised the education of our children in its response in the past few weeks and months. I entirely empathise that we've got a global pandemic and we've got an economic crisis, but we need those young people to be educated, to be protected, to be skilled, so that when they come out of school, they're able to help our economy grow again. And telling us that there's going to be a summer of catch-up without any detail as we're going into the summer is too late. We saw that there was a multi-academy trust, 10,000 pupils. They got given one laptop by the government for pupils that didn't have access to online. Right. The government have really got to start moving on this.
And it sounds like from Gillian that it's a work in progress, and we may hear more this week.
It's not good enough.
Miata, your think tank has done a report about young people and how they are particularly affected by what's going on at the moment. 1/3 of 18 to 24-year-old employees we know have lost jobs or been furloughed.
Yeah, and the piece of work that we did showed that actually 16 to 24-year-olds is twice as likely to lose their jobs than any other age group, particularly because they work in the sectors that are likely to be hardest hit by this pandemic. So there's a genuine problem here, and it comes off the back of the fact that actually this generation of young people have had a pretty raw deal. Prospects in the job market are worse than generations before. Social mobility is worse than generations before. Their ability to access things like housing is worse than generations before. And so I think we have to give some due attention to how we support young people through this pandemic, not least because they often fall through the cracks. So if you take something like universal credit, which is woefully inadequate, by the way, but even the inadequate level of 90 odd quid a week, young people don't get that. They don't have access to that. So they are really feeling the squeeze. And whatever we do as we think about how we build back from this, or whatever we do as we think about the recovery, we generally need to think about training for young people, access to jobs and opportunities and apprenticeship in order to allow them to weather the storm.
Well, look, let's just hear from a couple of young people that we've been talking to. I mean, 18 to 24-year-olds, as we've said, they are feeling the strain and they possibly will face more risk than others. The UK's younger generation likely to be hardest hit. And our reporter Greg Dawson has been speaking to some of them.
Come on, please. Come on.
At her home in Gillingham, Chloe Saunders is getting ready to take her dog for another walk. One of a number of daily activities that now fill her day since she was made unemployed.
So I thought, no, 100% fashion is where I want to be. That's what I want to do. And now, I've completely questioned that.
Chloe, who's 20, studied at the Fashion Retail Academy in London before landing her first job just before Christmas.
Felt very emotional, actually. It was just such a big relief that I'd found something and got into something that I really, really wanted to do.
Within a few months, her company were forced to make her redundant.
It was a bit of a kick in the teeth, really. Dropped my confidence right down. It has made me question whether this is the career I want to go into now. After being a dream for so long and then having that sort of questioned is really disheartening, really.
And from a practical point of view, Chloe, how has this affected you financially?
At the moment, I live with my parents and my brother, and I want to live on my own, try and get some independence. I want to move nearer London. Obviously, it's very expensive nearer London. So that savings and that extra money, and now I'm not entirely sure how that's going to go. It's going to postpone that. You know, I don't think I'll move out for a long time now.
Chloe's not alone. A recent report by the Resolution Foundation think tank found 18 to 24-year-olds are most likely to have lost work during the crisis. Just as the time has arrived for a generation to get out into the world, they're now facing a future stuck at home in front of a screen.
Can I quickly ask, where do you want me to look? Shall I look at my...
It's camera.
Into the camera.
Katie Tarrant speaks to me from behind her laptop in her family kitchen. This is where she's concluded her 3 years of an English literature degree at Warwick University. All of those plans for celebratory farewells with friends and hopes of a graduation ceremony abandoned.
It's quite upsetting, to be honest. And it's the same for all of my housemates and a lot of my very studious friends. We've spent third year working as hard as possible to get the best grades. And we always said term 3 is the time where you meet people, you socialise, and you celebrate the end of such an important part of your life. And now we're not going to have the opportunity to do that. I know it's going to end in a celebration in the garden rather than actually getting to see my friends again.
She's still planning to start a postgraduate course in London in September, but is worried about the practicalities.
I accepted that place on the basis that it would be likely for me to find a job because I can't afford it otherwise. It's now looking like an extremely bleak picture of having to try to fund my masters on the side through my own means. I'm anxious about the opportunities that will be available for me and also about just that loss of, the excitement I had when I started uni. I'm not going to have that with my masters. I'm going to be starting it from my laptop in my kitchen and not meeting my classmates for possibly 3 months into it.
18-year-old Shaw Chifamba has passed the time during lockdown by teaching himself Japanese and fine-tuning his guitar skills. Like thousands of others, his A-level grades will be determined by teacher assessments instead of exams.
That feels very... You've been kind of stripped away. It feels like something's been taken away from you, like an opportunity's been taken away from you. When it comes to an exam, there are certain things you can prepare for, so your exam sometimes will be a lot better than your classwork. And the fact that you don't really get to prove that now, and it's just based on your classwork, feels quite depressing, because your opportunity is gone to really show that you've actually built upon your mistakes from the past.
Shaw is hoping to study computer programming at Royal Holloway University in September, knowing his first-year experience will be very different from the one he'd looked forward to.
I think my friends and I, the first thing we kind of think of when we think of our first year is it's the kind of not so serious start to uni, right? You get to settle in, you get to meet everybody, you get to join a bunch of societies, join some sports, but obviously because of coronavirus we can't really do that. In terms of actually meeting people as well, it's going to be really different if you have to stand 2 meters apart from everybody when you actually get onto campus. Yeah, first year is going to be a bit of a mess, I think.
Good evening. Welcome to the latest Downing Street press conference. Let me first run you through the latest data.
Earlier this month, university leaders from around the UK said students may have to stay in a protective bubble of the same small group when the UK's university campuses reopen in the autumn. The plans could involve housing students in groups taking the same subjects, with timetables that bring them on campus at the same time to minimise contact with others and reduce the risk of infection. Much of the focus during this pandemic has inevitably been the risk to the health of older generations. But there are people like Sonia, who's 21, who have been shielding because of an underlying health issue.
So I had open heart surgery and a double valve transplant 4 years ago. So although I'm not considered clinically vulnerable, if I did get ill, it wouldn't be the most ideal situation. My immune system isn't the best. So just on my own precautions, I decided to self-isolate myself.
She doesn't think the government advice has been clear enough for her generation.
I never quite knew where I sat. I never quite knew what I was meant to be doing. And I think a lot of people have felt like that, especially who are younger, who aren't quite fully aware of their condition, for example. If they're 10 to 15, who aren't fully engaged in knowing what their condition is, for them, understanding the guidelines that are written for adults by adults is really difficult. So we started to think about how we can change the guidance to make it more applicable for young people, including things like mental health awareness, sexual health awareness, young carers, things like that. People aren't understanding the guidance because the guidance isn't differentiated for different generations.
She's also written to Downing Street to ask for teenagers to be able to submit questions for the government daily briefings.
Let's go to questions from the public first.
You can't submit a question unless you're over 18. And that sucks because there are a lot of young people who want to know what's happening with their A-levels. They want to know what's happening with their GCSEs. There are 16-year-olds who have just as much viable questions as those who are 21. And it's not fair to not include them in the conversation. We might be young, but we have so much to say. We deserve to have a lot more input in what's happening to our futures.
As the lockdown eases and the focus shifts from managing a public health crisis to an economic one, the challenges for the so-called corona generation have only just begun.
That report by Greg Dawson, I mean, this is a crucial time of their lives. We heard them all there. They're missing out on all sorts of milestones, as well as socialising, maybe thinking about what they do about their next education moves. Do they go to university? Do they defer? I mean, Darren, you've added to then all of that, the doubts about future prospects beyond education. What specific policies are Labour developing to help young people as we come out of this coronavirus crisis?
So we in the Labour Party have called for the government to start looking at a jobs guarantee, including apprenticeships associated with any fiscal investment to build infrastructure across the country, because we want to give those young people opportunities to work, to get further education and to be ready to drive the economy forward when we're able to do so. And
Gillian, apprenticeships. The Prime Minister's promised an apprenticeship to every young person following fears of a wave of youth unemployment. He said the government was drawing up a strategy for tackling job losses and major investment in skills and training. Do we have any more details of that? Because he made the announcement, we didn't get details at the time, and according to some reports, the Cabinet weren't expecting him to announce it at that moment because it hadn't been costed and it's rather expensive. Have you fine-tuned the details?
Well, I spend all my day thinking about youth opportunities and employment and apprenticeships. I mean, I left school at 16 myself and did an apprenticeship in a car factory. They're a fantastic way into work. I'm a huge fan. And there's a number of plans, and we're discussing those across government. We're engaging with the sector as well. I spend a lot of time doing that. And, what we want to do is make sure that, there's apprentices available to all those who want them, and also redundancy, those apprentices that are being made redundant, to extend offers for them as well. So there's a lot of work, and it's a huge part of focus. But youth unemployment is something we are very focused on and trying to avoid, because we understand the scarring impacts of that, and what it does to young people's confidence. We heard a bit of that from some of the young people then. So we're absolutely doing as much as we can to make sure we can avoid that.
And Miata, how much do apprenticeships contribute to raising confidence levels and giving some youngsters something to work towards?
Well, I think they can be an effective part of the system, and there can be a route into work. I think one of the challenges we've had with the apprenticeship system is that it hasn't really had the accessibility for the groups that you'd want and hope would take up apprenticeships. And the government's put a lot of money and effort into the apprenticeship scheme, and it tends to train up the people who are already working in organisations. So if the government is thinking about massively ramping this up, it needs to think very hard about how you ensure those that really need it have access to it.
Thank you very much. I can't believe we're almost at the end of the programme now. And Caroline Wheeler, we need to mention, don't we, two things happening this week. The Brexit trade talks stepping up a gear tomorrow. Give us the line in a sentence.
Basically, there's been talks already about the trade deal, which we need to agree by the end of the year when the transition period ends. Those talks have so far stalled between Monsieur Barnier and David Frost, and now it's going to be direct talks between the Prime Minister and Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, tomorrow via video link, in a bid to re-inject some energy into those discussions.
An extension to the transition period has been ruled out by Michael Gove, hasn't it? So we know that's not happening, although there will be a lighter touch when it comes to border checks for food and goods entering the UK. That was something he said this week.
It was, and for 6 months. So that's right. And the other thing we have to mention quickly is that the BAME report on coronavirus is also due to come out. There was a version of it which came out a week ago, but there was much criticism that the recommendations seemed to be lacking from that report, and some suggestions that there were 7 recommendations that had been made by the government. We're now expected to see that report in its entirety this week.
With confirmation that the black and minority ethnic population were disproportionately affected by COVID-19. As you say, last week's report that we saw didn't include any recommendations, but we've seen a leaked version of those recommendations. I guess we're going to get those this week. Caroline, take us through the front pages if you could.
So if we start with The Guardian runs with a story which says, don't lift lockdown until contact tracing system proves to be robust and effective. And this is a warning by the World Health Organization. And of course, there are concerns that as we ease lockdown, that contact tracing system is not proving to be as effective as one would have hoped, with only a third of those being traced who have tested positive for coronavirus. So The Guardian is focused on that. We have The Times newspaper, which is saying nervous shoppers could be tempted back to the high street with tax cuts. They have leaned into this suggestion by Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, that potentially there could be an injection, a stimulus package for the high street, which could involve VAT cuts, which might encourage shoppers to go out and spend more money as we head towards, worrying signs of a recession. We know already the Telegraph has the op-ed by the Prime Minister writing for the paper that he used to write for before he entered Downing Street, talking about not photoshopping our history and launching that Equality Commission. The interesting thing that they say there is that is going to be report directly to the Prime Minister, but it's going to be overseen by Kemi Badenoch. So they've splashed on that story. And finally, the Mail is looking at the issue of schools again. The Mail's been really focusing on the schools issue because it affects just so many people. And they are carrying a warning from the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health that we're facing an obesity time bomb with our children being off school for 6 months and not exercising and perhaps not eating particularly effectively during that period. And they're worried about what will happen when kids return.
And a lot of the papers have a picture of Patrick Hutchinson, revealed the hero of the protests, the Mirror says, and he's on the front page of the Mail as well, carrying one of the protesters away. Why I Saved That Fallen Protester by Good Samaritan Patrick Hutchinson. That's all we've got time for this evening. My goodness, we talked about quite a lot, but I could have done with another hour. But thank you all for joining me this evening. Thanks to my guests, Caroline Wheeler, Gillian Keegan, Darren Jones and Miata Farnbalay. And, of course, to you for listening. Now, if you want to be sure that you don't miss any future editions of the Westminster Hour, then please do subscribe to this podcast on your favourite provider.